here, and I understand that all of you come from different walks of life, and you're serving in the ministry in different ways, and so we have to rely upon the Holy Spirit to deal with you the way that He will deal with you as I speak, and because everything may not necessarily be the same to this person next to you. I'm Dale Turner. I was saved, surrendered to preach, and preached my first sermon in March in 1963. And so I have my license, 1963, that long ago. So
I was 1 year old.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate you pointing that out. I knew I was going to get that. I knew I was going to get that. And so, anyway, I have been in the ministry. I started in Corpus Christi. I can go all the way back to a time whenever I worked with a man by the name of Lester Roloff, which I doubt anyone in this room has any idea who I'm talking about. But I was Lester's, one of Lester's what he called preacher boys, and that's where I got my start. And through the ministry, it's really changed. And I think that one comment that I need to make clearly to you that is that even though we may not want to change, we've got to change. We can't do church the way it was done in 1950. We just can't do it. It just doesn't work. And a lot of people want it to work, and we just have to get in the new grip of the way they are. Some notes that I did make, and anytime you want to raise your hand, say something, you do that. I realize that probably all of you that are actually in pastoring, you're probably bivocational. And this is where I have to be very frank with you and tell you I've never been a bivocational pastor. I've always had I've always had a staff. I've always been full time, and so I almost hurt for you. I don't think I could do the job of a bivocational pastor. I look at it as an incredibly difficult job, very, very difficult. And if you know of anybody that is bivocational, you be thoughtful and you pray for them because you have no idea what it's like to try to take care of your wife, your children, your job, pay your bills, mow the grass, and then the church expects you to go to the hospital that night. That's a very difficult thing to do. And usually these people that we're talking about that are bivocational, you know how many people they have on staff? They don't have any. It's them. They're responsible for everything. Uh, Without me mentioning a name, I know of one of those pastors that he came to me and we were at the gym together. He said they brought the paint buckets over and told me they needed me to paint the parsonage. And no, it's true. And so he painted the parsonage uh, by himself. And that's hard. That's really hard. And you may be thinking, well, does that really go on? Does it? It does. It goes on. Now, I'm going to be very candid in some of the things that I'm going to say. I'm going to start out by putting a lot of emphasis on communication. I want you to think about this. Uh, this is just hypothetical. If Tim comes to your church and he preaches this next Sunday, and while he's there, he asks someone if they'll speak with him for a moment, and he spends whatever 10 minutes telling them he's going to be praying for them, he's going to be caring for them. And if he can be of any help to them, well, here's my phone number, and you call me, and I'll be glad to help you. Then you contact that same person the following week and say, what did Tim preach last week? What do you think they're going to say? I don't have any idea. Well, did you talk to him? Oh, yes. I had a great talk with him. And so a lot of times we spend our entire week trying to prepare this marvelous sermon, and we're going to be the greatest preacher in the whole wide world, and we put all of that emphasis in the pulpit when the people don't even remember us in the pulpit anyway. They remember the calls. They remember the visits. Communication is incredibly important. If I had a choice, of course, I'd like to have a great preacher and a communicator, but you don't usually get that. I think, Walter, I might want a communicator more than I want a preacher because it's going to be the communicator that's going to sit at the bedside whenever I'm in a crisis, or whenever you've lost a job, or whenever you've had something go haywire, one of your children's gone haywire, which is almost inevitable. And you go through those kind of things. So don't forget that. Now, a true story that just happened to me over Father's Day. We had a large number of our family at the house. And tell me if this is your experience. Everybody's all sitting around. I've got sons, I've got grandsons, I've got great granddaughters, and everybody's got a cell phone. And everybody in the room is sitting in a chair somewhere, sitting on the floor, and they have a cell phone. You see that in your house? And I said this to him. I said, now, wait a minute. I want your attention. Quiet, quiet. Everybody get real, real quiet. I want you to listen, okay? And so they, well, what's Papa going to have to say now, you know? And so everybody gets real quiet. I said, I want to know something. Why, when all of you have your cell phones in your pocket right now or in your hand right now, but whenever I call you, huh? Don't raise your hand. Have you ever done that? Have you ever had someone call you and you just look at the phone and ignore it and say, I don't want to talk to them today? Huh? You know? And so what'll happen is you'll get a phone call from the deacon and you'll say, oh, I'm going to put him off. Huge mistake. Well, that's that lady that on the phone now that got mad at me at church this morning. I'm not going to answer the phone. Huge mistake. We don't want to run from difficulty. And the phone is a great, it might be beside the Bible, it might be the greatest gift that we have today to serve God. Let me tell you something about Walter, very short. Uh, he's very short. He's on the thin side. Every time I call Walter, no, almost every time I call Walter, he answers the phone. If he can't answer it, he will immediately text me, I'm in a meeting. I'm with someone. I'm at the bank. And within an hour, he'll get back with me. Can you say that about yourself? You know, what do the people in your church say about you? Do they say, oh, he doesn't look at his phone, or he doesn't answer his phone, which in fact you do. You've got it right in your pocket. And folks, we've got to learn to use these cell phones to communicate with the people in our church. It's a tremendous tool. Would you agree with that? It's a tremendous tool. But yet I see so many people today not answering that cell phone. And even in our churches, that's not good. Communicate with your people, even if it's hard. I'm gonna go back to Walter. I don't want to pick on y'all. Walter faces days that are real, real difficult. He can't say, "Well, I'm not going to communicate today. I'm just going to go home." Can't do that, and a pastor can't do that either. You can do it, but you won't be very successful. You've got to be able to communicate. Okay, that's the first thing. Any questions about that? Y'all got that? Are you going to do it? Okay. The next thing I want to talk to you about is counseling. A lot of preachers are afraid of counseling because they'll say, well, I don't have any kind of a degree in counseling and I don't feel comfortable. I've had preachers tell me this: I don't counsel, I preach. You also go down the drain real quick. I lost a son, and whenever I lost a son, uh, it was a terrible experience in our life. And it was Tim, this Tim, who came to our home. He doesn't remember what I'm getting ready to tell you. He didn't even he really wasn't even aware that he was sitting in my recliner. And I really want you to get this. What do you think Tim did? He listened. He didn't say, "Oh, Dale, it's going to get better. Oh, you're going to feel better in a year. Oh, you'll forget about it. Or it'll get behind you." He just sat there and listened. He listened to me cry. I mean, he listened to my thoughts. He listened to everything that was jumbling through my mind. And it was so hard for me to get my feet on the ground. He counseled me. The greatest counseling session I've ever had in my entire life. And I don't think he spoke 20 words. So a lot of times we need to say to our people, yes, I'll counsel. Yes, I'll talk with you. Yes, I'll sit down with you. But you really don't have to do much more than just listen. You know, the Bible even says we need to be slow to speak. If you want to be a good pastor, you not only have to communicate, but you also have to counsel. But that doesn't mean you have to talk. Just listen. My wife occasionally will say something like this. Can you slow down just a minute and listen to what I have to say? Don't act like that doesn't happen to you. You know? And so I do. That's a huge part of it. Huge part of it. Now let's go to something else. Hospital visits. I'm opening the floor up for this. How do you do it when you're bivocational? How do you do it? I'm serious. Anybody got a comment about that? I mean, uh, back whenever we had the COVID that we were dealing with, and we had bivocational pastors who were constantly being called saying, I think I've got the COVID, or I think my wife has COVID, or my such and such is in the hospital right now, and you've got all these things going on, and the grass is growing, and the house needs to be painted, and you need to get ready for a sermon. You know, you're usually preparing your sermon Sunday night, like around 8 o'clock at night, because there's just not enough time. You know, I mean, how do you do that? But yet, some way, somehow, you have to work it in. One thing that may help you, and I did this just yesterday. I'm not recommending you do what I'm getting ready to tell you. I'm not recommending you do this. I was sharing it with Walter a while ago. The church yesterday wanted to talk to me about becoming their interim pastor, and I told them that what I wanted to do before we would do that, I wanted to stand up in the pulpit before the people, tell the people what I would and what I would not do. And I just told them point blank. I said, okay, here are the things so you'll know in advance. You won't be complaining later. You'll know in advance. I do not go to Houston hospitals. I do not go to San Antonio hospitals. I do not go to Corpus Christi. I do not go to Austin. I don't do it. Well, yeah, I could look at them. I could see them going, oh, that must be terrible. But I said, that's it, though. I can't do it. I can't do it. What's the lesson there? You have to be candid with your congregation and don't try to act like you're Superman. You get thrown into that Superman role and you think, I've got a happy wife. I'm going to all of my children's ball games. I don't miss a one. I preach every Sunday. I mow the grass. I paint the house. I make 40 visits a week. I go to the hospital. I go to the nursing homes. No, you don't. You don't do all that kind of stuff because you can't do it. Hmm? But it's part of it. I mean, it's part of it. And And a couple of simple things I want to mention to you. When you do go to the hospital to visit, don't just go barging in, knock on the door. If you go barging in and you don't knock on the door, you may be highly embarrassed. I mean, do I need to go on and explore that a little bit more? Huh? No. And then another time I can remember, and this is one of my when I was very young, I had this experience. I had my music director with me, and we went to visit someone, and I had not thought about saying anything to him about this. And so we go in, and we're standing there, and there's this lady in the hospital. This is Memorial Hospital in Corpus Christi. And so, it's going good. It's kind of a soft visit. It's going well. And all of a sudden, my music director says, "Well, what's wrong with you?" Oh, Lord. No. I do not want to know what's wrong with this lady. I do not want to hear what's wrong with this lady. Well, sure enough, she was more than willing to tell us everything that was wrong with her. It pretty much killed the day. Not only that, but she said some things that I do not want to hear this. You know, okay? So maybe if you don't remember anything else, remember this. If you make a hospital visit, do not ask them what's wrong with them. Remember, you're a listener. When you go somewhere else and they'll say, "Well, what did you find out about so and so?" Well, I didn't find out much. Why? Because they didn't tell me much. Why didn't you ask? Because that's not what I'm supposed to do. You come out of the room learning what they were willing to tell you. Whenever I was the interim pastor in Cuero, which was not that long ago, I remember being asked to go to a room there in Cuero Hospital. I went in, I knocked on the door, and someone said, "Come in." And I went in. There was a lady. She said, "Are you a preacher?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Did my mother send you over here?" "Yes." She said, "I don't want to talk to you." True, true story. So I said, "Thank you very much." And what do you say? And so I walked out and I reported that to the mother, and that was it. But when you go to the hospital, be careful, be tactful, uh, handle yourself like a gentleman, and be a gentleman. And be careful with the things that you say and the things that you ask and so on and so on and so on. I mean, you don't want to go in a room and someone say something like, "Oh, well, I got cancer." "Oh, well, I guess you're probably not going to have long to live then, are you?" You know, people do those things. You know, people do those things. Back whenever he was coming to our home to pastor us, and he won't remember this either, but he kind of warned us about things that people will say. Uh, I was doing a funeral in Portland, Texas, and a person walked up to me and a guy I'd known for many, many years. And he said, "Dale, I understood that your son committed suicide." And I said, "Yes, he did. He committed suicide." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that he went to hell, I guess." And so you see, we've got to be careful when you're out there in the field. And I'm one of them. I was telling them earlier, I make mistakes in the pulpit all the time. I'm terrible about making mistakes. I told a guy yesterday in church, his boots were so ugly. He's a rancher. And I said from the pulpit, you need to paint those things with Rust-Oleum, brown Rust-Oleum. And was a while ago he's talking about wanting to set me up live. No, you do not want to set me up live. Uh, I was talking. I was in 1 Samuel 16, and for some reason I got haywire, and I said that David was ugly, and the Bible says to the contrary that he was a very handsome man. So I'm making all kinds of mistakes like that. But be careful with what you say when you're in someone's home, when you're in someone's hospital room, or wherever you may be. You be very careful about that. Home visits. We don't make many home visits anymore. Uh, you know, it's kind of intimidating when you get out of your car and you're walking up the sidewalk. beavers are going on, lights are flashing, all over the neighborhood. The people across the street, their lights have come on. You feel like I'm being arrested. The police are here. Generally speaking, at my home, if someone comes and knocks on our door, like say after 7 o'clock, you know what we do? We say, and we go up and we look through the peephole. And you know what? I don't want you coming to my house after 7 o'clock. Society has done that to me, but that's the way I am. So if you can't do it that way, then answer my question now. So how do you make contact with them? Cell phone. Cell phone. You can talk to them. You can text them. There's so many different ways. It is a tremendous tool. Real quickly now, emails. He's very successful with emails. He does a very good job. I don't hardly use emails at all. A lot of your churches have older people in them. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think many of them use email. Do they? So email can be effective. It can be. Uh, so I'm not saying to rule it out. You can use it. There are times when you can use it. Maybe you want to, say something very long, and that's useful. So that's also a tool. And then another thing is weddings. I haven't done a wedding since 1974 or something like that. Uh, People aren't getting married anymore, but I would suggest that you get a format. Format is where that a couple comes and they ask you to marry them, and so you meet in the church and they walk up to you and they say, "Where do I stand?" Well, you don't want to look like an idiot and say, "Well, I don't have any idea." Y'all follow me on this? Now I am going to embarrass you. How many of you have a wedding format? One, two. But you know what that tells me? He knows he needs it. See? And back in the back, you know you need it. So that whenever you come back together to do that, you know precisely where to tell people when to walk down, when the guy comes in, the groomsman, and so on and so on. Don't wait till the last minute and then go into an absolute, frenzy. Start today, start tonight, start tomorrow, and getting you a format and having it ready. How many of you are prepared to do a funeral? Okay, brother, I'm going to give this to you. I wondered who I would give this to you. This is a Truett Baylor University book that I obtained in 2002. And it is everything you ever wanted to know about doing a funeral, conducting a funeral, preaching a funeral, preparing a funeral, walking away from a funeral, or whatever it may be. So, brother, here. I think you'll actually enjoy it. Don't go home and say, I hope somebody in the church dies. Actually, when I first got that book 20 some odd years ago, I will admit, I kind of had the urge. I wish somebody would die so I could try one of these. Well, sure enough, they did. And then the last thing that I want to mention, and this probably is the least that pastors want to do, and that's to go to the nursing homes. It's hard going to nursing homes, but you have to. You have to. In the last church that I was full time in, I would go once a month. And I would make sure that I had all of the names and everything because I only wanted to do all of that in one visit. I didn't want to go visit one day and then 2 days later go back again. Now, another thing that's going to sound nasty, take your business cards with you and put them all over the room. so that their children, their grandchildren, their mom, whoever it might be, they'll know you were there. Because the person you're going to see may not ever know you came. And you want the people to know you came. And I know that doesn't sound good, does it? That's right. He just said that's real. You don't want someone coming up saying it, and believe me, anyone that's a pastor has heard this. Well, he pastored the church 5 years and went and checked on my mother one time. Well, it's probably not true. He probably failed to leave a business card. And I even recommend leave one, two, leave a bunch of them, leave them all over the room. Do that. So to me, pastoral care is about communication. You have it tougher than I ever had it. And your tool is your cell phone. I know I'm putting a lot of emphasis on that. I never had that. It's something that is of great value to you because you are bivocational. And after you've done everything that you had to do for the day, you can go in and sit in your phone in your chair and you can make that one phone call. And I'm telling you, I really mean this now. I'm telling you, that one phone call to someone in the church, they will not forget. Do you agree with that? They will remember that and they will forget your sermon. So remember that communication, cell phone, counseling, hospital visits, home visits, emails, funerals, weddings, and nursing homes. Anybody got any?
I would just add to that, um, and Dale, I mean, you get the key things in all of those things that you're going to have to deal with. But what I dealt with as a young pastor is, okay, what is truly a crisis that needs my attention in pastor care? Because not everybody who thinks they're in a crisis is really in a crisis. So I came up with this acrostic in my head that I just checked off these boxes if I'm getting this. And this is what a crisis is that needs pastoral care. It's kids. If a kid gets hurt, if a kid's in the hospital, kids in the emergency room, they don't know what's going on. That's a crisis. Cardiac. Somebody has had a heart attack or they're having heart surgery. I'm going to say cranial, head injury type things. It may be they're still in the emergency room, but that's a crisis for the family. Now I'll say, well, what is it? Well, somebody's gallbladder. So yeah, I mean that's outpatient now, and they may want you to come, and their grandmother may tell you to come, or something like that. But that's not a crisis unless there's an overnight stay. That's when you would go, because they were supposed to come home, they didn't. Uh, Cancer, pretty much anything with cancer, a surgery or a setback. You can't go with everybody's getting treatment, but if it's a cancer surgery, that's something that's important. And I would say combinations where you've got a cancer patient who may have be having a minor surgery, but they're in such a place health wise it could turn very quickly. So that's just something I just kind of did a check box on of okay, when do I make an hour drive to go see somebody in the hospital, and when do I not? And I can't satisfy everybody, but I needed a standard that I lived by, that I could operate by and feel good about. And sometimes I'll add another C to it, calls. You get multiple calls from different people about a certain situation. and that may tell you there's something going on that you don't want to know. Now, in seminary, I did a unit of clinical pastoral education, which is basically chaplain training for one summer in Baylor Hospital. And man, they assigned me to the emergency room. I was one of the guys there, and one of the guys up on the cardiac floor. So some of that is where I developed that, and came to see that. But coming from Yoakum, Texas, and then being in an emergency room in inner city Dallas, I saw stuff, I heard stuff, never thought I'd ever deal with. But just know that sometimes you will get a call, and it's not as big a crisis as what they think. I got a call one time as my Saturday morning, as my daughter's birthday party was beginning. And the man expected me to come to his house based upon, I said, "What's wrong?" He said, I can't tell you, you just got to come see this. And I'm still talking on the phone that's connected to the wall because that's the days it's in. And every one of my family members is looking at me, especially my daughter, whose birthday party it is. And I said, I can't come. I'll come after my daughter's birthday party. And they said, if you don't come right now, don't come at all. Hung up the phone. And this is an Ever Sunday member, and I could tell they were mad. I didn't know what they were mad about. I got through the party, went over to take my medicine and hear what they had to say. What had happened is their neighbor had built a fence that connected their property. There's a low place at the back, and it had just rained, and the new fence backed water up into the garage. He wanted me to go with him and go confront his neighbor. That was his crisis. That was not a pastor care situation. So God delivered me, and my daughter would have never forgotten. You were not there for my birthday party. Now, if somebody just had a car wreck, or there's a bunch of kids in a car wreck, yeah, she probably would have understood that as she grew up. But you have to make and figure out those things kind of on your own in your own situation of what to do. But they'll give you a good coverage of what you're going to have to deal with and figuring out ways to do it. Now, how do you care for yourself? And I will say it has never been more difficult and it's never been more important that you as a pastor you as somebody in ministry figure out what I need. And one of the things I've found is I've read all these different people and all these different things, and what I'm going to tell you is there is no one thing that fits all. I'm going to give you some thoughts on it and some ideas on it, but a lot of it is self-discovery on your own part of your own personality. So I'm going to start this off. How do you care for yourself? Dale hit some really good things, and, and part of it is learning through this process of how do I care for people in a way that doesn't exhaust me and that gives me something. And it's true. They will They will forget what you preach, but they will not forget how you made them feel. They'll remember that. We had a good friend, family friend. He was the man who was my in-laws' age. In fact, he was in my father-in-law were really good friends. They pastored in the same area. His name was Glenn Booth, and Glenn Booth was for Texas Baptist the guy who set up a ministry or a network of counselors or ministers for ministry couples, their families, or people in ministry. And he did that all throughout the state. And I'm just going to tell you and share with you some things he found out in his time of working with ministers. Uh, One of the things that he did is whenever a pastor or a church staff member had a moral failure, if they would let him, he went and talked with them, or he talked with them over the phone. And he said, this is not something I'm going to share your name or anything. I just want to know what happened so I can understand how I can help other people who are in your position or stay out of the position you've gotten into. And he said, in all the time and all the people he had a chance to talk to, he found that all these moral failures, there were two things in common in every single one of them that would talk to him. And one was a question that he would ask them, and they would answer. Nobody who had a moral failure was consistently having a daily quiet time for themselves. They did a lot of studying in preparation for sermons. They did a lot of stuff getting ready to talk or speak or teach or whatever, but they weren't having a consistent daily quiet time for themselves. And here's where it's really personal is you've got to figure out how to do that. I'll come back to that in a moment. He said the second thing is something I never had to ask. But in every case where there was moral failure, they said the same thing. I never thought it would happen to me. Now, what does that say? That taking care of yourself spiritually is the most important and most valuable thing you can do. And to have that consistent connection between you and God. I'm going to tell you something. You are his child first and his servant second. And you've got to maintain that child to his father connection, that relationship, if you're ever going to be of any use for a long period of time as a servant. So that is a key thing. The best thing, some of you are in ministry positions, some of you are thinking about it, some of you are involved in your church. The best thing you can do for your pastor, for your church, and for everybody around you is find a way to consistently have a daily time with God that involves prayer and Bible study, Bible reading, however you want to call it, whatever you want to turn it, whatever is your thing. You just need to have that and figure out how to do it on a consistent basis. And what Glenn Booth found is not. I don't think it's changed any. I think probably if you went to the guys today who have had moral failures, they'd probably be telling you the same thing. So, how do you do that? Again, a lot of it is individual and personal, but it involves talking to God and letting God talk to you every day, apart from sermon in preparation. Now, here's the thing. Yes, your quiet time from God can lead to sermons and lead to lessons and lead to teaching. It should. But if you get dry in your personal devotional life, I can almost guarantee you, as a ministry person, it's because you're looking for something to teach instead of I'm looking for something for me to learn. I'm looking for a way for me to connect to God. What is He saying to me? Where is He working on me? Where is He dealing with me and my faults, my problems, my failures, my gifts, my talents, my fears? There has to be that consistent daily time where you do that and you do that in an ongoing way. Okay? Let me stop and just ask you this question. What is the most important thing you've learned about a daily time with God? What's the most important lesson you've learned about having a daily time with God?
And everything else, that's what it comes to.
Yeah, and there's a big important thing that I've learned that you touched on in both those places. You have to get away from other inputs so that God has the ability to speak to you. And you're not there to work on your to-do list that day or what all you've got to do or anything else. You've got to shut some things out and get away from it. And another thing I've learned, you also have to have enough time that you're not looking at time. You're not constantly you have to have enough time where I can get through this and do whatever I've set up kind of to do and let God maybe interrupt that sometimes. Philip, what was what you just mentioned is you've had to find some things. Philip has to find the time and the place because he's got 4 kids. They don't always sleep the same hours every day. They don't always wake up in the same mood every day or in the same physical condition. Uh, all of you have mentioned something that you have learned. You need to be a student of yourself and of your relationship with God. And what are my faults? What are my ways? What are my weaknesses? Where am I tempted? And where do I need to learn discipline and just to be consistent? For me, it's always to schedule it, to have it on a schedule. I don't want to schedule it because that's sacred, but you're going to have to schedule it. I've got an appointment every morning. And yes, there are things that interrupt. Yes, this is a great tool, but man, it can also be a big interrupter. I oh, somebody texted me this early in the morning. Must be something wrong. And they're just saying, what a great game last night or something like that. Oh, what was that game? And yeah, I'm going down a rabbit hole. So you just have to learn yourself and learn how to take care of yourself. Learn what helps you to flourish and what doesn't. Learn who speaks to you as far as devotional writings and other things. Uh, I have found two key things that keep me going. Uh, Daryl Tomasic was here and said he reads through the Bible every year. How many of you read through the Bible every year? Okay, I can't do that. I read through the Bible at least once every 5 years. I'll set aside a year and just read through the Bible, and I try to change it up. And so the last time I did it was a year ago. My wife and I listened to the Bible together. For most of Christian history, that's all people could do. The common people, you could only listen to it being read. It was written down, particularly the Old Testament, and most of Paul's letters was written down to be read to people. So when you pick that up, yeah, it's not the same as when you're reading it, but there are some new things that you learn and that you pick up on. Here's what I do on a daily basis, or as in my way of going through it regularly. If I'm not doing something special, going through the Bible, uh, I'm reading through one of the books a little bit at a time, and in all these cases, a little bit at a time of the first 5 books of the Bible, Pentateuch, one of the prophets, one of the books of history in the Old Testament, a psalm, a proverb, or Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. I just finished Ecclesiastes. I'm reading through the Gospels, one of the Gospels. I keep all these markers in my Bible so I know right where I'm at, and I don't try to read even a whole chapter of any one of these things. Most Bibles now are kind of broken down, and here's a topic, and here's what comes. That's generally what I kind of try to do. I get to the end of that, and I say, okay, what did that say to me? What is it that I need to pray about? What is it saying to me about who I am, about where I am, about what I need to be aware of, about what I need to be warned about what I need to learn, about what I need to forgive, about what I need to be forgiven about. And I keep just going through those. So I'm always reading, no matter what I'm doing, I'm always reading through the Gospels a little bit at a time. I find if I try to do these big chunks, like reading through the Bible, I don't get what I really need. I can, but I still need that big picture from time to time of this whole story that I spent a year going through. And I'm not saying don't read through the Bible every year. Some of you can do that. I just found that that's not what's most effective to me, but yet I need to be challenged in that from time to time. And so I slowly just work my way through with no agenda other than I'm reading through Matthew and I'm reading through, I'm always reading through the gospel, and then I'm just reading through the rest of the New Testament. So marking those places every day, reading through it. What I found is the thing that is most invigorating is no matter what I'm doing, no matter how busy I get, if I can always just read something about Jesus every day. listen and spend time with Jesus every day. And even in all the other things in the Bible, what is it doing pointing to Jesus? And it's amazing how many things you pick up when you're thinking, okay, I'm going to be reading about Jesus, or I just read about Jesus, and he referred to this passage a few days ago when what I read. And you see it is all connected. I need to go at a slower pace to really think about it and work on it in my way. And I need to work, and this is just me, and I would say most people are not this way. I need to continually work at turning scripture into prayer, praying through the Bible. That's been the most important thing about my prayer life and my devotional life is always reading about Jesus and always seeking something in what I've just read to turn into a prayer. Where is it teaching me how to pray this? Yeah, I've got my prayer list that I've got in my Bible. And in fact, in some of these slots by these markers, I've got a prayer list. So when I finish reading a couple of things in the Old Testament, here's a prayer list on this. At the very end of my New Testament readings, there's this prayer list of what I do with Stitch Ministries and the other people in Stitch Ministries and what's going on. In the middle there's my family and what I do in my prayer list with my family. So I've got this all broken down so that it's not reading time, prayer time. I used to do that, and I would always run short. I'd always feel like I wasn't balanced. And here I'm doing it as I go through it, and I feel more balanced. And if everything falls apart, you have those mornings, your wife comes in, got a flat tire, or car won't start, or something. I at least I can have a few moments with Jesus, and I can pray for my family. And those begin to be my priority. Making those connections, making what connections that really help you. Okay. Uh, Also, don't just read your favorite books. Don't read what's easy for you. Learn to be challenged, and that's why I have to do at least once every 5 years, read through the whole Bible in a year and figure out how to do it. It really, I won't ever do it any other way now other than chronologically. Once I did through the Bible chronologically, I, even though I've been to seminary and I've had all these courses, this helps. And even though there's disparities or differences between the different chronological Bibles, if you can get that whole picture of redemption, God's whole story as he reveals it in the Bible in a way that is from Genesis to Revelation in something close to the order, that made a huge difference to me. I didn't discover that till a few years ago. So you have to be a constant learner about yourself, about how to restore yourself, how to find that time, but it becomes a daily thing. Here's another thing. Find who speaks to you. An author that speaks to you, devotionals that speak to you, other things that you bring in to keep it fresh, to keep variety to it. And that's why I've decided that's the most variety I can bring into something is doing what I'm doing. But that daily quiet time and that daily consistency is so very important. C.S. Lewis will say something like this: it is so important that every day we get our mind focused on him before the thoughts of our day rush at us, and this is the direct quote, like wild animals. Like wild animals. And that's what happens when you get thrown off, or you don't get up on time, or you sleep late, or your alarm didn't go off. The day rushes at you like a wild animal. And so to have that. Now, some of you are night people. And I would say, okay, if you're most awake at night, God bless you. Uh, Not everybody's gifted. I'm not necessarily a real morning person, but I just know I've got to do it in the morning. I grew up as a kid and through college that at nighttime, that was the time I did it. It was somewhere in college that I really learned, okay, I need it at the beginning of the day, not at the end of the day. But if you're a night person, I would still say, hey, do something in the morning. And maybe if you're more awake and alert, spend time before you go to bed with the Lord. That's great. But find what works. for you and what doesn't work for you. Find where God is leading you and what He's teaching you and what He's showing you about yourself. And journal it, talk about it, write it down so you can go back to it and remember it. Now, I started to say, find people who speak to you, not just your favorite parts of Scripture, but find books that challenge you and people that challenge you and devotions that challenge you, and bring that in from time to time. Maybe sometime there'll be a particular thing that I really want to look at, and maybe I just do uh, part of the Old Testament reading, and I take the time to do some sort of special study. Sometime there's a thing that you're doing at church, and everybody's doing it together. One of the things I was really amazed at Northside is I decided to found this way of reading through the New Testament in a way of doing just a simple question of things to go through every day. And I just kind of threw it out there for a couple of Sundays. I didn't plan any big thing about it. And I said, who wants to do that? If you'll just email me, and it's there in the bulletin. And if you want to read through the New Testament with me over the course of a year, let's do that. I had 300 people sign up to do that. That is 10 times more than I thought would ever do it. Now, not all of them finished it. Nobody does. But sometimes you can lead people in your own personal devotional life. The biggest thing, I had to do a study of this in what I do. The biggest thing that will keep a kid in church once they graduate from high school, far above anything else, is if they are taught how to have their own quiet time and they develop it before 18. If they're taught it in the home. Now, taking kids on mission trips is a big thing. Taking kids to camp is a big thing. Making sure they're fed and they're challenged and they're trained, they're with their peers, it's a big thing. But the number one thing, as far as what studies have shown, of why our kids who are 20 and 30 and they're still in the church, is because they were taught how to have a daily quiet time, and they developed that in their home, not the church, in their home. So you have to train parents. You have to train people. And some of them don't know how to do it. So you have to train them. You have to teach them. And you can only teach them in what you're doing and what is developing in you. So use those things. Again, devotionals can be a very big thing, but that can't replace Scripture. One of the people I read consistently is Oswald Chambers. And if you have not read, and this is not everybody's cup of tea, but Oswald Chambers makes more and more sense to me every year when I read it. And he's got a daily devotional called My Utmost for His Highest. If you find it, if you want to try it, make sure it is written in written in modern English, because he's a Scotsman he died in World War I, and the way they spoke English then is not how we speak English in Texas now. But the modern language one is easier to understand. It makes more sense. Let me just read you something that hit me the other day that speaks to ministry, and it speaks to this very thing we're talking about. He said, drudgery is the test of genuine character. The greatest hindrance in our spiritual life is that we will only look for big things to do. Yet, and he quotes, Jesus took a towel and began to wash his disciples' feet. John 13, 3-5. We all have those times when there are no flashes of light, no apparent thrill to life, where we experience nothing but the daily routine with its common everyday tasks. The routine of life is actually God's way of saving us between our times of great inspiration, which come from Him. Don't always expect God to give you His thrilling moments, but learn to live in those common times of drudgery by the life of the power of God. The fact of doing it consistently, day in, day out. You may get to the end of the day, I don't remember what I read. You will have done it. You will have done it. And God, Jesus prayed, Lord, the Holy Spirit, take the Holy Spirit and remind my disciples everything I've taught. You know, Peter got up and preached on the day of Pentecost from the prophet Joel. He quoted it. It was drudgery to have learned that. But God brought it back. Something of giving great life. And he does the same with you. You're not looking for that to okay, God, I need something today because I got to preach Sunday or I got to get this lesson done tonight or whatever. You want to get to God and let him take care of the timing of things. I'll just read something else he goes on to say. If I will do my duty, not for duty's sake, but because I believe God is engineering my circumstances, then at the very point of my obedience, all of the magnificent grace of God is mine through the glorious atonement by the cross of Christ. If I live day by day, depending on Him, walking with Him, He can take those moments and turn it into something that's special, something we didn't know what it could be. So, it's that daily walk with God. That's what I want to hammer home. Figure that out in your own life. You can learn things from other people, but you know what? John's relationship with Jesus was the same, and yet it was somewhat different than Peter's relationship with Jesus. It's somewhat different than James's relationship with Jesus. And it's going to be the same way with you. It's going to be unique. He wants to have a unique relationship and walk with you that only you can figure out. You can learn from other people, you can grow from other people, but you can't depend upon other people. You got to learn to depend upon Jesus to sustain you, to walk with you. What you said, I cannot do this. One of the consistent prayers God has taught me to pray is no matter how many times I've done this before I get up and preach, I cannot do this on my own. I cannot do what I'm about to set out to do. God's going to have to do something else, bigger than greater than me. And so the only way I'm ready to do that is if I'm walking with Him, talking with Him, spending time with Him. If I'm not, I'm open to temptation. I am open to falling. I'm open to just doing it as a business, doing it because that's what I do, and that's where I burn out, and that's where I stumble. That's where I fall. Okay, any questions about your personal quiet time? Ways to incorporate things in what? Yes, dealing with guilt. Here's where I have learned. I'd go when I deal with it myself, and when I have somebody come down to me, and it's a rededication thing during an invitation, which is rare, but it sometimes happens. And sometimes they will come to me as the supply preacher because they don't want to tell their preacher, and they can get it off their chest because I'm not going to see them at HEB that week because I For example, I'm in Carrizo Springs, and this woman comes down and said, I've never told anybody before, but I had an abortion when I was 20. I just need to get that off my chest. You never told your pastor, never told your husband? No, never told anybody. How do I get rid of that or deal with the guilt? One, it is through that relationship. And if I can't sleep, I have found what I've got to get up and do is read the Bible. And if it's a guilt thing, and this is what I told this woman, and this is what I tell people when they come down, and this is what I tell myself, and that's why I'm telling other people. I turn to Psalm 51, and I make that my prayer. I pray it out loud, verse by verse, all the way through it. And it is better than anything I could make up to deal with the guilt, to deal with, man, I really made a mistake today. I said something I shouldn't have said, and I'm going to have consequences, and I'm dreading the next time I see that person, or I really messed up with my wife or my kids or my family today, or I spent all time on this and I should have been there. And if I just go to Psalm 51, which is what David wrote after he was confronted about his sin with Bathsheba, and if he wrote a prayer that God inspired that covers that, then it can cover anything. And I just make that my prayer. And if I get so used to it, I'm just going through the words, I go to a different translation. So it makes me read it and say it in a different way. And I found the best thing to help me go to sleep because I've been there. I've had those times. I'm dreading stuff and doing stuff. My wife had to learn this thing because we've always been in Victoria's the biggest town we've ever been in. So she would always have this thing of, oh, I forgot to tell you, we're in bed, we're about to go to sleep. So and so are about to get a divorce. Why are you telling me now? I'm trying to put all that stuff away, you know. She had to learn, go make a note, tell him in the morning, and but when it would happen or when something like that would come up, scripture and going to scripture and spending time with God and praying that out. That is what I learned was the best thing for me. Yes, sir. I have found if I'm reading through something and I realize, okay, I just went to the meeting I've got to have or the trip I've got to make or the person I need to talk to, and I just my eyes went over the words, but I don't know what they said, and I go back to it again. I get this to read it out loud, to stop, take the time to read it out loud to myself. It engages my brain at a different level. It helps me to go through. Scripture memorization is an important thing. I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but memorizing things. One of the things I do when I'm going through these, sometimes I just get like here in the past month, I just stopped on Philippians 3 and tried to memorize as much of that as I could because I thought this is where God is really speaking to me right now. And just figuring out where is God leading me in His Word and in my time with Him. Other questions, other thoughts on personal devotional life? Complacency, yes. So if I get complacent in it, and it's kind of like when your prayer life is not going well. It's kind of the same thing. Okay, is there an unconfessed sin? Is there a broken relationship? I just begin to go through those things. Is there uh, going back to your thing? Sometimes when I pray through Psalm 51 about stuff I've done, it's like God says, "You thought that was big. You thought that was the problem. That was not the problem. This is the problem. This is what you really need to be confessing." Is this other thing that David confessed. This is where it ties in. That's the real problem, not what you're saying is the problem or you're thinking is the problem. Those are minor things. Those are things of this world that are going to pass. This is the eternal thing that you need to deal with. But just praying through that. Complacency, if none of those are the thing, then that's where I go to variety. How do I break up? How do I do this a new way? And sometimes it is, okay, I'm going to put this aside and where is God really speaking to me? Is it my prayer life? Is it my family life? Is it my finances? Is it something spiritual? Is it something biblical I need to focus on? And I just try to go there and focus on that for a while. And then let that speak to me what I need to. So I'm not just trying to follow, oh, it says to read this today. I get complacent doing that. I can check that off because that's my type of personality. Is I'm a list maker and a check marker. But that doesn't always mean I'm growing because I read it and I checked it off. So I need to throw things into my life in front of my life so that I can keep growing and keep learning and keep that relationship alive. The big thing I found is if I'm always reading Jesus, everything else has bears more life to it. And part of the reason of reading through the Bible, even chronologically, is you read about Jesus at one point, and then you're reading about other things. And I find I'm always now that I've done this enough, I miss that, and I always need that. So just reading through Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and I'm not trying to do a whole big thing or even a chapter. Maybe I'm just reading through the Beatitudes today, and I'll work on through the Sermon on the Mount a little bit at a time, and really try to figure out what God's saying to me in that. Yes, my utmost for His highest. Part of what it speaks to me is that it was written. Some of it is his notes to his students. He did a Bible teaching college in England before World War I. He actually died in World War I as a chaplain to British soldiers in Egypt. Died of a burst appendix. And he never wrote anything down. But his wife was a court stenographer. And she took detailed notes of his messages. And after his death, put this all together. And it's one of the longest continuously in print books. But what it says to me is he's speaking to me as a minister because he's speaking to his students. And that's what helps me a lot because I can read what other people write about everyday life, and that's good. But this speaks to my heart as a pastor, as somebody in ministry. Because he will say at different points, you need to take yourself up by the scruff of the neck and get rid of your laziness. You know, he will be confrontational at times. And then at times, it just always seems to have a life to me. Now, my wife can read through it and say, that just doesn't speak to me. So you have to find what does work without it just being a complacency thing. But every time I read it, it's like I've never read it before. And I've worn out a book, the hardback book I got, and I have it on my phone now. I just want to say a few more things on this area of care. As you come into a church, as you're in a position where you're paid by the church and you get a job description, I would look very carefully at what they say is your time off and what is your vacation and what is your conference time. And I know many of you are just beginning in this, or you've not done it that long, or you don't know. But here's where you've got to learn yourself too. And it's better to try to begin to negotiate this at the front end than later on. My first church says you can have 2 weeks of vacation. No matter how long you have been there, you can only have 2 weeks of vacation. But you can have 2 weeks where you go do revivals. Well, I'm this kid preacher just out of seminary in St. Joe, Texas, and there ain't nobody going to call me to go do a revival. So I negotiate with them and I say, if I took this to go to a conference, could I still take these 2 weeks? And I said, I'm young. Nobody around here is going to ask me to go do a revival. I'm not the revival kind of preacher. And they agreed to that. And here's where you've got to learn. How many of you are extroverts? How many of you are introverts? Okay, how many of you don't know who you are? Somewhere in the middle. Some of you are morning people, some of you are night people. You learn yourself. Here's what you've got to do. When you see what your time off is, you've got to get with your wife, your family, whoever's significant to you. And you need to set out your calendar year by year. And you need to schedule your time off. And you need to even talk on a monthly basis with your spouse. Okay, when do you need me? When do you know you're going to need me? Is it going with you to this doctor's appointment because it's causing you anxiety? Is this a time I really need to be with you and the kids? You need some time off from the kids? Yeah, no matter where you are in life, figure those things out. Put it on your calendar. Put it on your calendar. Schedule out your vacation. Schedule out this time off. What I did when they gave me, because some of you are refreshed and renewed by reading books. It's life changing to you. You're a reader. I'm not a reader to the point where that's my go-to thing. I do it some, but it's not my go-to thing. Some of you, maybe like me, I like to learn with other people. I like to learn in a conference setting. I like to go to conferences. Uh, some of you just want to get alone and pray. That's what Jesus did. I just want to be alone and pray. Okay, go do that. You find what restores you and you schedule it. One of the things that my wife and I found, and this is important for you guys who have kids at home and anybody who's married, is your wife needs to schedule that time too. You need to schedule that time with them. We found when in our first church, we could still do this, going to Glorietta every summer together as a family was one of the biggest things we could do and the best things we could do. Now you can't do that anymore because Glorietta isn't Baptist anymore. Still there as a camp, but it's not like it used to be. But even now, it's finding a conference or a place we can go to. That's something we share in common. And sometimes I have gone to her to conference. I didn't go to a women's conference, but I went to conferences with her that weren't that big to me, but I knew it was big to her. And so finding those places, they're coming back now after COVID. Focus on the Families doing this big conference just for ministry couples. 2 weeks ago, Judith and I went and spoke just a little bit to a group of pastors who were attending the Family Life Weekend to Remember. If you've never heard of a Weekend to Remember, that's a good place to go just and to work on your marriage and to take that time. You are probably going to get some pushback from your church. Somebody in your church is going to say something about it. Don't pay that person any attention. They do not know what they're talking about. Don't tell anybody this, Philip. Okay? Don't tell anybody. I have been accused to a point where it got to the personnel committee about one thing one time, and that was taking too much time off to spend with other pastors. That was their complaint. He spends too much time with other pastors. And they wanted what is the form to write a formal complaint? Went to the personnel chairman, wanted that he spends too much time with other pastors. And I wasn't spending that much time because I was still new here. I'd spent a whole lot more time with pastors where I knew people had developed other relationships. But find that time too where you do what you're doing here. And let me just say, this is so unique. What you're seeing here, there are tons of associations that are dying to have something like this happen. It's not. God is doing something unique here, doing something special here. So keep in touch with each other through this time. Now, part of what my training has also done is to try to help coach pastors, and that's not coming in and telling you got to do more of this and less of that. It is just to talk with you in a way that brings out, I ask questions to help you figure out what to do next. The most common thing it is it time for me to leave? Is it time for me to go to this church that's interested in me? What do I do next? I can't talk to anybody in my church about that, and I need to talk it out. So that I do that. That's a service that we provide in some